So this video is our final video on the theory of apoptosis. This one is, how does apoptosis begin? So I know it seems a bit weird that we've started with what apoptosis is and now we're going back to how it starts, but I find that if we teach it in this order, it just makes it a little bit simpler to get in there. So there are two pathways that we need to know with apoptosis, and this is the diagram that's in your notes on page 8. So one pathway is this pathway on the left here, that is the intrinsic pathway, and the other pathway is the pathway on the right here, and that is the extrinsic pathway. All of these names like cytochrome C, APAF1, BCL2, the numbers on the caspases, that is all. You don't need to know the numbers and the names. Okay, so you just need to know the general pathways, and I'm going to walk you through and show you two little flow charts that'll get you there. So each one of my flow charts, the one on the intrinsic pathway has 4 steps, and the last one is the same. The last two are the same as the other pathway. So really there's only about 5 or so different points that you need to learn. It's just about understanding which one is which. So we're going to start with the intrinsic pathway, and I'm going to try and draw this as we go. So the intrinsic pathway starts with stress or DNA damage within the cell. So here is my cell, here is my nucleus, and here is my DNA. Okay, but we're going to say that right here is my stress or my DNA damage. Okay, so in here we have number 1 is the stress or DNA damage, and that's coming from inside the cell. This is why this is called an intrinsic pathway. The other name for this pathway is the mitochondrial pathway. So essentially when you get this stress or this damage inside the cell, it sends a signal out to the mitochondria. Okay, so this mitochondrion over here has got a signal, so sends signal to mitochondrion. Now what that does is it causes the mitochondrion, and we're going to add here and sends signal to mito. What's going to happen now is the mitochondrion does a whole bunch of different things. It receives the chemical signal and then it releases its own chemical. Okay, so I'll keep going different colors here. So now the chemicals that are released, yeah, I like to name them, but I have never seen you to need to know this. So they're called cytochrome C, but they are more chemicals released. So you can see here why we talked about signaling pathways to begin with. So you've got your signal transduction is now happening through this process. So the chemicals are now released by the mitochondria. So that's number 2, is my chemicals released by the mitochondria. And it activates these things that I like to draw like Pac-Man. Oh, I'm not drawing that one very well. Okay. So now it activates, I'm going to make them angry, yeah? These enzymes. Why are they enzymes? They're called caspases. But what you need to know here is that it activates what we call a caspase cascade. Okay, so that's number 3, is the activation of the caspases. Now these guys are exactly what you think they are. They are Pac-Man. They are moving throughout your cell and they cause apoptosis to begin. So what does that mean? That means here is your cytoskeleton. And these guys are going to go along and start chomping at your cytoskeleton. So the caspases are what actually cause that initial step of apoptosis to occur. So there's really kind of 3 things that happen in the intrinsic or mitochondrial pathway. There's some kind of internal or intrinsic message, and that could be DNA damage from inside the nucleus. It's going to send a signal to the mitochondrion. And the mitochondrion is going to release more chemicals that activate these molecules called caspases. And they cause a caspase cascade, which means one caspase activates another caspase, activates another caspase. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my playlist a video that I need you to watch that shows the steps of apoptosis. I might put it in just before this one as well, so that by the time you get to me, you should be able to watch what I'm going through. All right, so that is the intrinsic pathway. That's it. You will find that in some of the notes and in your book, it goes into way more detail. It talks about this stuff here. Yeah, it'll talk about BCL2. Yeah, it'll talk about, you don't need to know about that. That's the signaling molecule. So this here is just that signal that we talked about. The DNA damage was number one, and it was sending a signal. Yeah, so that's all BCL2 is. It's a signal. Sends it to the mitochondria. The mitochondria releases another signal called cytochrome C, and that causes the beginning of this thing called an apoptosome. And I'll show you, the video is pretty cool. And what that means is that we get an activation of this caspase 9, and then it activates all these caspases 3, 6, and C, and whatever. And so what this stage is in the middle here, that is my caspase cascade. Okay? So that is the difference between what you read in your book. You'll read all about BCL2. You don't need to know the name. You'll read about cytochrome C. I like to know cytochrome C, but they shouldn't be asking you questions about specific chemical names. And so you've got DNA damage, sends a signal to your mitochondria, which sends a signal to your caspases, which initiates your caspase cascade. So 3 main points. And then after that, that's when you're going to get apoptosis. Again, here is more detail than what you need. But if you are interested in exactly what's happening, instead of just saying it signals this and it signals that, this is what we would walk through. So this is more detail than what you need. So you've got stress or DNA damage at the top here. Yep. That's going to activate your BCL2 proteins that go from your cytosol and they bind to your surface membrane on your mitochondrion. They form pores. Yeah, so these BCL proteins actually form pores or holes in your mitochondrion, and that allows the cytochrome C to leak out. So as it leaks out from the mitochondria to the cytosol, that causes the formation of an apoptosome, and that activates these caspase cascade. Okay, can you see here that you've got one caspase being activated, and then it activates a whole bunch of others. Yeah, so this is kind of that signal amplification that we were talking about. This is a good example of signal amplification. And then after you've activated your caspases, they're going to go chomp, 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 and they're going to chomp up all of your cytoskeleton. All right, let's go on to the next one, which is the extrinsic or death receptor pathway. So the intrinsic pathway has messages that come from within the cell. The extrinsic pathway has messages that come from outside the cell or the exterior of the cell. So this one's even easier than the previous one. So we've got this. This is our cell membrane. On the surface of our cell membrane, we have receptor molecules. Most likely they are proteins, but in particular, when it comes to apoptosis, we have these things called death receptors. Such a cool name. Okay, now a cytokine, if we remember, cytokines were a signaling molecule in the immune system or just a signaling molecule within our body. So the signaling molecule, the cytokine is going to bind to the death receptors. So here is my cytokine binding to the death receptor. And so that is number one. All we need to worry about here is that this activates a bunch of, my angry little caspases. Okay, so my angry little caspases, oh, he would almost look happy for a minute. Now he looks like he's wearing glasses. And that is the caspase cascade. So they activate number 2 down here. Is my caspase cascade. So how much easier is that one? Just so you don't get confused though, or you can pause, you can zoom past the next bit if you want to. This is what's written in your book. This is what you need to know. The cytokine, or a signaling molecule. A signaling molecule binds to the death receptor, which is on the outside surface, and it activates the caspase cascade. That's it. Okay, so this might be if your body goes, all right, I need to get rid of the webbing between your fingers. It's not going to be something that's written in your DNA, or it might be, but it might be done by an external signal. And that external signal is going to initiate apoptosis in these cells here. All right, so let's have a look at this video in just 1 second. I'm going to link this into your playlist and you can watch that one. But this is what's written in your book. It says that your cells have transmembrane proteins called death receptors. That's this little black guy in the middle here, yeah? That's it. It's just a normal protein. Now, they are specific to different cytokines. So this here is from our stimulus response model. That's the same thing we said, yeah? So the stimulus response model has all got to do with the fact that there are specific target molecules that act on specific cells. Once that binds that, you get signal transduction and you get your caspase cascade. So you can see that overall, what we really want to know is that you get signaling oh, that's the wrong one. Sorry, you get signaling molecules binding to the death receptor and the caspase cascade is triggered. That's it. And then you get apoptosis. So to begin with, it lets identify which pathway is which. What's the pathway on the left over here that's going to initiate my caspases? You can pause, give it a think. This one here should be my extrinsic or my death receptor pathway. And then the other pathway is this one here. This one over here is going to be my intrinsic, or we can call it the mitochondrial pathway, which makes sense because there is a mitochondria involved. And that is the end of what happens in apoptosis.